So the Civil War is over. 4 absolutely brutal years have passed, and the United States has this monumental task ahead of it. It's not just about stopping the fighting, it's about figuring out how to truly reunite a nation that's been completely torn apart. This whole period, what we call Reconstruction, was this incredibly complex and really revolutionary attempt to answer one of the toughest questions in American history. After a war to end slavery, what does it actually mean to be free? Right when the war ended, there was this feeling of, cautious optimism. And this political cartoon from the time just captures it perfectly. You've got Abraham Lincoln, the rail splitter, holding the broken country together while his vice president, Andrew Johnson, is literally sewing the North and South back up. It's a really powerful image and maybe a deceptively simple metaphor for the enormous job of repairing the Union. And this quote from Lincoln in the cartoon, it just frames the whole challenge perfectly. A few more stitches, and the good old Union will be mended. Sounds so straightforward, right? But what does it really take to mend a country? How do you heal the wounds of war and, maybe even more importantly, build a brand new future for millions of newly freed people? And that right there became the central problem. You see, it was a huge two-part question. First, how do you even handle the paperwork of bringing the southern states back into the country? And second, what is the new status? What are the rights of 4 million African Americans who are no longer enslaved? And on those two questions, well, nobody could agree. Okay, so this really lays out the two completely opposite game plans that define the whole era. On one side, you had presidential reconstruction. This was Lincoln's and then Johnson's idea: let's do this quick, be lenient, and let the states handle most of it. On the flip side, you had the radical Republicans in Congress, and they were called radical for a reason. They believed the federal government had not just the power, but the duty to completely remake Southern society and to guarantee the rights of freedmen. I mean, these were revolutionary ideas for the time. And these two visions, they were absolutely destined to clash. So let's dig into the president's approach first. After Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson, a Southerner himself, takes over. And he really doubles down on this idea of a fast, forgiving process to get the South back into the fold with as little meddling from Washington as possible. His plan was, honestly, pretty simple. Southern states basically just had to do a few things: officially cancel their secession, wipe out their war debts, and ratify the 13th Amendment, which made slavery illegal for good. Do that, and with most former Confederates getting a pardon, they were pretty much welcomed back in. The key thing to get here is that this was almost entirely political. It had very little to do with creating real social change. And what happens when you have this super lenient plan? Well, the result was immediate and it was devastating. The new Southern governments, which were full of former Confederates, passed a whole series of laws that came to be known as the Black Codes. Their goal was simple: get control back over the Black population and basically recreate the power structure of slavery. And I mean, this was not subtle at all. The Black Codes essentially made being Black a crime. They said Black men couldn't serve on juries. They wouldn't accept their testimony in court against white people. They even forced orphaned children back into labor for their old masters. And get this, vagrancy laws meant that if a freedman couldn't prove right then and there that he had a job, he could be arrested. It was, as one historian put it, slavery by another name. So you can imagine, right? Back in Washington, the Republicans in Congress are seeing all of this happening, and they are absolutely furious. They refuse to let the new Southern delegates take their seats, and they decide that if the president isn't going to lead a real reconstruction, then Congress will. And just like that, the whole power dynamic shifted. So what's their first big move? The Civil Rights Act of 1866. And you have to understand, this was huge. For the first time ever, the federal government stepped in to say, no, everyone born in America is a citizen, and it explicitly told states they couldn't mess with people's fundamental rights. This was a direct shot at the old idea of states' rights. And they moved fast. I mean, the speed was just breathtaking. In 1866, they passed the Civil Rights Act, right over Johnson's veto. A year later, 1867, boom, the Reconstruction Act dissolves those Johnson governments and puts the South under military rule. And by 1868, they make these changes permanent with the incredible 14th Amendment, guaranteeing citizenship and equal protection of the laws for all. Of course, President Johnson was fighting them tooth and nail this whole time. He was using his veto power, his executive authority, anything he could to block their plans. The fight got so nasty that the House of Representatives literally impeached him. Now, he was narrowly acquitted in the Senate, but the message couldn't have been clearer. Congress was running the show now. So, with Congress in charge and federal troops on the ground to enforce these new laws, something absolutely unprecedented started to happen in the American South. The entire political world was turned upside down in what turned out to be a brief but brilliant experiment in democracy. 2000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's one of the most radical transformations in American political history. That's the number of African American men who were elected to public office, local, state, federal, all of it, by the time Reconstruction ended in 1877. A truly mind-boggling figure that would have been completely unthinkable just a few years before. So how on earth did this happen? Well, it all came down to the new rules that Congress put in place. The Reconstruction Acts forced Southern states to write brand new constitutions that gave Black men the right to vote. Then the 15th Amendment protected that right across the country. It just opened the floodgates. For the very first time, Black men went to the polls in huge numbers, ready and eager to be part of the democratic process. And they didn't just vote, they ran for office. And they won. We're talking about representation at every single level of government. You had 2 U.S. senators and 14 members of Congress. At the state level, more than 1,000 men served, including an acting governor in Louisiana. You had Black sheriffs, school board members, and state legislators, totally changing the face of government in the South. And look, these weren't just symbolic wins either. These new office holders got things done. One of their biggest achievements was creating public school systems across the South, something that basically didn't exist before the war. They opened up hospitals and other state institutions to everyone and worked hard to rebuild the Southern economy. Their impact was real. It was profound. But, and this is the truly tragic part of the story, this incredible revolutionary period, it was shockingly short. The pushback was just too powerful, and the federal government's willpower started to fade, leading to what many historians now call an unfinished revolution. By 1877, a political deal was made, and the federal troops were pulled out of the South. And almost immediately, white supremacist Democrats took back control of the state governments. Through violence, through voter suppression, they just dismantled all the progress that had been made, and nearly all of those 2,000 African American officials were forced out of office. And that leaves us with this final thought. Reconstruction is this amazing moment of what's possible in a democracy, but it's also a harsh lesson in how quickly progress can be undone. It really raises a question that we are still wrestling with today. What can this brief, revolutionary, and ultimately unfinished era teach us about our own ongoing struggle to build a truly more perfect union?